there's something I want to talk about today that feels more personal and more painful than many of the topics I usually cover here on the Avoidant Guide. At the heart of this conversation is a question that quietly breaks a lot of people without anyone else realizing it. Am I the person they truly love, or am I simply an option? It's not the kind of question that usually appears all at once. Instead, it creeps in during quiet moments when you're left comparing what your heart hopes is true with what their actions actually show. You find yourself replaying conversations, analyzing their behavior, trying to figure out where you really stand in their life. That uncertainty can become exhausting. And if you're asking yourself this question, you deserve more than comforting words that temporarily ease the pain. You deserve an honest answer. Not one based on wishful thinking, but one rooted in what I consistently see through my work and in what attachment psychology reveals about avoidant behavior. There are very real differences between how an avoidant acts with someone they deeply love and someone they simply keep around as an option. Those differences matter more than most people realize. Before we get into those differences, though, there's something important you need to understand. Without this foundation, the similarities between these two relationships can easily fool you, making the differences seem much smaller than they really are. The reality is that avoidants rarely express love in ways most people naturally recognize. Securely attached love often looks warm, reliable, emotionally available, and consistently reassuring. Avoidant love usually doesn't look like that, even when it's completely genuine. That's why both the person an avoidant truly loves and the person they see as an option may experience many of the same behaviors. Both may receive affection, meaningful conversations, genuine laughter, moments of closeness, and times when the avoidant seems fully present. Yet, both may also experience distance, emotional withdrawal, or periods where the avoidant suddenly seems unavailable. This overlap creates tremendous confusion. Two different people can experience nearly identical avoidant behaviors, and both believe they are deeply loved. The real distinction isn't whether warmth exists. It's how deep those feelings go, and more importantly, what they cost the avoidant internally. When I talk about cost, I'm referring to the emotional price intimacy demands from someone with avoidant attachment. Their nervous system naturally tries to conserve emotional energy. It protects vulnerability, independence, and the internal resources that close relationships require. When they're involved with someone who remains an option, they usually stay inside those protective boundaries. The connection is real. The enjoyment is real. The affection may even be sincere, but none of it pushes them beyond what feels emotionally manageable. They never have to stretch very far outside the identity they've carefully built around being self-contained and emotionally controlled. Everything changes when they genuinely fall in love with the person they truly love. They begin paying emotional costs they don't experience anywhere else. They start feeling emotions that are stronger than their usual coping strategies can comfortably manage. They catch themselves behaving in ways that don't fit the version of themselves they've always relied upon. They become vulnerable without intending to. They invest more than feels safe. They reveal pieces of themselves that normally stay hidden. Those moments when they move beyond their carefully controlled emotional limits are often the clearest expression of authentic avoidant love. The first major difference between the person they truly love and the option is surprisingly simple. With the option, the avoidant stays comfortable. Comfort doesn't mean they don't care. They may genuinely enjoy that person's company. They may find them attractive, interesting, funny, and enjoyable to spend time with. They can be thoughtful, kind, attentive, and even emotionally close for periods of time, but the relationship never reaches the level where their deepest fears become activated. It remains within a range that their nervous system knows how to handle. Because of that, their behavior often appears relatively steady. They don't constantly swing between closeness and distance. They don't suddenly disappear the moment intimacy increases. Within the normal limits of avoidant attachment, they can seem fairly reliable and emotionally present. Ironically, the person they truly love often doesn't receive that same consistency. Instead, they're the one who experiences the emotional highs and lows. They receive incredible warmth one moment, followed by unexpected distance the next. They feel the closeness deepen only to watch the avoidant suddenly retreat. That withdrawal isn't necessarily a sign that love has disappeared. More often, it's a sign that the emotional intensity has become overwhelming for an unhealed nervous system. As the relationship grows more meaningful, the avoidant's internal alarm system becomes louder. The deeper the connection feels, the stronger the instinct to protect themselves by creating distance. This creates one of the most heartbreaking paradoxes of avoidant attachment. Sometimes the strongest push away happens precisely because the feelings are strongest. The more dramatic the hot and cold pattern becomes, the more likely it is that the avoidant is struggling with emotions that exceed what they know how to regulate. The constant cycle isn't healthy, and it certainly isn't pleasant to experience, but it often reflects genuine emotional investment, colliding with deeply ingrained protective patterns. In other words, the more they have to manage their emotional reaction to you, the more powerful that reaction probably is. Ironically, a relationship that feels calm and emotionally effortless with an avoidant may actually involve lower emotional stakes. Meanwhile, instability at a deeper level can sometimes reveal authentic love, pushing against the limits of an attachment system that still hasn't healed. The second major difference shows up in the quality of their attention. Avoidants pay attention to many people. That's why attention by itself isn't enough to determine where you stand. The important question isn't whether they notice you, it's how they notice you. With someone who remains an option, their attention stays fairly broad. They appreciate the person's personality, enjoy conversations, remember details, and genuinely engage. They aren't pretending. Their interest is real, but it usually stays focused on what's visible. They notice your humor, your opinions, your habits, your accomplishments, and the version of yourself that naturally appears in everyday life. Their curiosity rarely moves much deeper than that. With the person they truly love, something very different begins to happen. Almost without realizing it, they become fascinated by what's underneath your surface. They start noticing your contradictions, the emotions you try to hide, the fears behind your confidence, and the quiet parts of your personality that most people overlook. They become deeply interested in your inner world rather than simply your outer personality. They pick up on the small things you reveal without meaning to. They hear the difference between your words and your emotions. They notice what remains unsaid just as much as what is spoken. Because avoidants spend so much of their own lives managing hidden emotions, they're often remarkably skilled at recognizing those hidden layers in someone they genuinely love. That deeper level of attention creates an unusually detailed memory. They remember tiny conversations, emotional moments, passing comments, and subtle changes in your mood that even you may have forgotten. More importantly, they begin developing an emotional awareness of you that surprises even them. They become quietly tuned into how you're feeling, often sensing emotional shifts before you ever explain them. That kind of instinctive attunement is something they rarely offer to someone who is simply an option. It happens because whether they're ready to admit it or not, your inner world has become personally important to theirs. They begin noticing changes in your mood before you've even found the words to explain them yourself. They respond to emotions you never openly express, showing a level of care that their avoidant mind never intended to invest. It is the kind of awareness they cannot easily explain because it goes far beyond what they normally allow themselves to feel. With someone who is simply an option, the avoidant notices you. With the person they truly love, They find it impossible to stop noticing you. Even during the moments they're trying their hardest to create distance. The third difference appears in the way they handle conflict. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of avoidant attachment because what people usually assume is happening is often the exact opposite of what's actually taking place. When conflict happens with an option, the avoidant usually remains composed. They rely on the familiar strategies they've practiced for years. They detach emotionally, become highly logical, lower the emotional intensity, and avoid getting pulled into vulnerable conversations. Everything feels measured and controlled. It may come across as cold or uncaring, but in reality, they're simply functioning inside their emotional comfort zone. Conflict with the person they truly love rarely stays that organized. It becomes less predictable. Their usual emotional control starts to crack in subtle but meaningful ways. The calm exterior that normally seems impossible to disturb doesn't disappear completely, but it becomes much harder to maintain. Instead of responding with perfect distance, they begin reacting emotionally. Sometimes they speak before thinking. Sometimes frustration, fear, sadness, or vulnerability slips through despite every attempt to suppress it. They may say things they later regret or reveal emotions they never intended to expose. Those reactions are not always pleasant to experience, but they reveal something important. Their emotional investment has become greater than their ability to manage it. Someone who remains an option doesn't usually have the power to break through those protective walls. The person they truly love often does. As uncomfortable as those moments can be, they reveal that you've reached a place inside them that their usual defenses can no longer completely control. The fourth difference is something I haven't explained quite this way before, yet I believe it's one of the clearest signs of genuine avoidant love over time. I think of it as the return to honesty. With an option, the avoidant can comfortably maintain the version of themselves they've carefully built over many years. They appear confident, emotionally steady, independent, capable, engaging, and in complete control. That version isn't fake, but it is carefully managed. It has been shaped to protect them from feeling too exposed. The option usually experiences that version consistently, but the person they truly love starts seeing someone else, not all at once and not permanently, but in brief moments that become impossible to ignore as time passes. The carefully managed image begins to slip. The real person appears. The one who still carries emotional wounds, the one whose independence developed as protection rather than simply personality, the one who isn't as unaffected as they desperately try to appear. Sometimes this happens through unexpected honesty. They suddenly admit something vulnerable before realizing they've said it. Sometimes it shows through actions that completely contradict their self-sufficient identity. They reveal obvious longing, tenderness, disappointment, or grief that they normally keep hidden from everyone else. Other times, it's simply the feeling of being with them during those rare moments when every wall quietly falls away. Their presence feels different, more alive, more authentic, more emotionally real than the carefully controlled version you've become familiar with. Those moments are incredibly significant because the option rarely experiences them. The option receives the polished version almost all the time because nothing about that relationship requires deeper emotional exposure. Only someone who reaches the avoidant's deepest emotional layers creates enough pull for the real self to emerge. And when it does, what you're witnessing isn't simply a temporary loss of composure. It's the closest thing their psychology allows to an unspoken confession. The fifth difference may be the clearest distinction of all. It comes down to sacrifice. Real sacrifice cannot be faked. It cannot be performed for appearance sake, and it cannot exist without genuine emotional investment. With someone who remains an option, the avoidant generally doesn't sacrifice the parts of themselves they value most protecting. That doesn't mean they aren't kind. They can absolutely be generous, thoughtful, supportive, and caring. They may invest time, affection, and sincere attention, but they don't give up anything that fundamentally challenges who they believe they must be. Their identity remains untouched. Their emotional habits remain intact. Their self-protective patterns continue operating exactly as they always have. When they truly love someone, something begins changing, quietly, gradually, and often so slowly that neither person notices it happening. They start sacrificing comforts they never imagined surrendering. They allow themselves to feel emotions they would normally shut down. They begin questioning the belief that they must always handle everything alone. In subtle ways, they admit that your presence matters, that your attention matters, that losing you would affect them far more deeply than they want to admit. They remain in situations that require emotional growth. Even when every instinct tells them to withdraw, none of these sacrifices are announced. They don't point them out or ask for recognition. In fact, they often resist every one of them because each step feels emotionally expensive. Yet over time, those small departures from their usual defensive patterns begin forming a clear picture. You notice tiny shifts, small acts of vulnerability, moments where they choose connection over distance, occasions where they remain emotionally present a little longer than they normally would have. Individually, those moments may seem insignificant. Together, they become powerful evidence that something inside them is changing. Someone who is only an option rarely inspires that kind of transformation. Only genuine love creates enough emotional pressure to slowly reshape the identity they've spent years protecting. Now, it's equally important to understand why being the option can feel so convincing. The option often experiences an avoidant who seems remarkably consistent. They're attentive, they're warm, they're enjoyable to be around. They remember details, make thoughtful gestures, and often leave the other person feeling appreciated and genuinely chosen. That's because in those relationships, the avoidant isn't fighting themselves. Their internal alarm system remains quiet. Their defenses aren't under pressure. Nothing about the relationship threatens the identity they've built around emotional independence. As a result, they're able to show many of the best qualities naturally. Their intelligence, their curiosity, their quiet warmth, their ability to listen carefully, their perceptiveness. All of those strengths appear without constantly being interrupted by fear or emotional overload. From the outside, this can actually seem like the healthier relationship. Compared with the person they truly love, who often experiences distance, mixed signals, emotional cycling, and confusing withdrawals. The option may appear to have received the better version of the avoidant, but that's only true on the surface. The option is experiencing the avoidant exactly as they are today, comfortably functioning inside familiar emotional limits. Nothing in that relationship asks them to grow. Nothing challenges the protective identity they've relied upon for years. The warmth is easier to give because it doesn't require vulnerability. The consistency exists because very little inside them is being tested. It's a relationship that remains emotionally sustainable precisely because it never demands more than the avoidant is already willing and able to offer. A relationship with an option stays consistent because it never reaches the emotional depth that would truly test the avoidant's defenses. It remains comfortable because nothing inside them has been deeply shaken. The option experiences the avoidant inside their emotional comfort zone. And while that version may seem warm, reliable, and enjoyable, it isn't where their deepest self actually lives. The person an avoidant truly loves experiences something very different. They experience someone who is being challenged by emotions they don't fully know how to handle. They witness what happens when love becomes stronger than the protective system designed to keep vulnerability under control. They see the emotional cost, the internal struggle, and the moments when the carefully managed version begins giving way to the real person underneath. Those moments aren't easy to live through. They're often confusing, painful, and inconsistent, but they reveal a level of emotional investment that only genuine love creates. Now, I want to address the question that naturally comes up after hearing all of this. Which one are you? I want to answer that as honestly as I can. The difficult truth is that the answer isn't always obvious, especially when you're living inside the relationship. I've worked with thoughtful, emotionally intelligent people who genuinely couldn't tell where they stood because avoidant behavior can look remarkably similar in both situations. On top of that, avoidants themselves are often not fully conscious of the depth of their own emotions. They experience conflicting feelings that create behaviors which are difficult to interpret with certainty. So, I can't offer you a simple formula that guarantees an answer. What I can offer are a few honest questions that help separate hope from reality. Ask yourself whether your experience included the kinds of emotional costs we've been talking about, not simply moments of affection or kindness, because both the person they love and the option can receive those. Instead, ask whether you witnessed the deeper signs. Did they ever unexpectedly let their guard down and reveal something vulnerable? Did they react more emotionally with you than seemed consistent with their normally controlled personality? Did they quietly make sacrifices that challenged their usual need for independence? Did they begin changing small patterns that they had always protected? When they withdrew, did it happen specifically as the relationship became more emotionally intimate? Or was their distance simply a consistent part of every interaction? Then consider the quality of their attention. Did they seem interested only in who you appeared to be? Or were they drawn toward the parts of you that most people never noticed? Did they remember tiny emotional details? Did they recognize feelings you hadn't spoken aloud? Did they understand the contradictions inside you without needing everything explained? And ask yourself one final question. Did they ever find their way back to you in some form? Not necessarily by fully returning to the relationship. Maybe through a message, a conversation, a small gesture, an indirect attempt to reconnect. Any moment where their feelings briefly became stronger than their usual defenses. Sometimes those openings are small enough to deny, yet meaningful enough to reveal what was happening beneath the surface. None of these questions will give you absolute certainty, but they can help you see your experience with greater honesty. And honesty matters because it allows you to make decisions based on reality instead of wishful thinking or unresolved pain. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to leave you with something that reaches beyond the question of whether you were the one they truly loved or merely an option. As important as that question feels, I don't believe it's ultimately the most important one. The better question is this, was the relationship honoring you? Was it meeting your emotional needs? Was it moving even slowly and imperfectly toward a relationship where both people could safely love each other? Because being the person who awakened an avoidant's deepest emotions is not automatically the same as having a healthy relationship. You may have been the person who touched parts of them no one else ever reached. You may have been the one who challenged their defenses, softened their walls, and became permanently woven into their inner world. And yet they may still have been unable to give you the consistency, presence, and emotional partnership you needed. Those two realities can exist at the same time. Someone can genuinely love you and still be incapable of loving you in the way that allows the relationship to thrive. Knowing they loved you doesn't erase your needs. It doesn't make emotional absence acceptable. It doesn't mean you should remain in a relationship that continually asks you to sacrifice your own well-being. What it does provide is clarity. It allows you to understand what was genuine, what was driven by fear, what they truly felt, and what they simply couldn't express because of the limits of their emotional development. That understanding has real value. There is profound peace in walking away knowing the truth, knowing you were deeply loved, even if that love couldn't become the partnership you deserved. There is strength in choosing yourself while still recognizing the reality of what existed. That is a very different experience from leaving, believing you never mattered at all. That mistaken belief often becomes a wound carried into future relationships. You deserve something better than uncertainty. You deserve to know the truth, whatever that truth may be. Within an avoidance inner world, the person they truly love and the option are not experienced in the same way. The difference appears in the emotional cost. It appears in the sacrifices they quietly make. It appears in the moments when their carefully managed identity begins to crack. It appears in their struggle, their vulnerability, their inconsistency, and those rare but unforgettable moments when their authentic self briefly steps forward, despite every instinct telling them to hide. That is the language of genuine avoidant love. Learn to recognize it, not so you can excuse unhealthy behavior, not so you convince yourself to accept less than you deserve, but so you can understand what was real, because you have always deserved the truth, not the version shaped by hope, not the version rewritten by heartbreak, simply the truth. And if the patterns we've explored throughout this conversation genuinely reflected the way they loved you, then your place in their heart was never insignificant. You mattered in ways they may never have fully known how to express. Their feelings were real, even when their actions couldn't consistently reflect them. The delivery may have been complicated, painful, and painfully incomplete, but the love itself was real. And somewhere deep inside, long before hearing these words, a part of you already sensed that truth.